First tonight, with Election Day rapidly approaching, concerns are continuing to be raised about election security. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson sat down with political reporter Rick Albin and talked about the issue and why getting election returns may take longer than we're used to.
We're on the eve of another election. There are some people who still question the integrity of elections, and you may not be able to address sufficiently for them to change their minds. But talk about the reality of how safe you believe elections are in the state of Michigan.
Well, I think it's been proven time and time again, whether it's in post-election audits or in the increased transparency of our processes, that we've got several layers of secure protocols in place to ensure that only valid votes are counted and that every valid vote is counted. And those security protocols have actually been honed over years, maybe even decades, of doing elections well in Michigan and also learning from our colleagues in other states and bringing those best practices here. Every election is an opportunity to get even better, but certainly the 2020 election, the great irony is, was actually the most secure and the most highly participatory election in our state's history.
What do you do as the Secretary of State, as someone who has a vested interest in people understanding the processes? How do you reach out to people who still have questions about that 2020 election?
Well, I work with Republican lawmakers and others who have been, taken the side of integrity, like State Senator Ed McBroom, to find ways. It's not just going to be me. I can provide the trusted information, but we need a lot of trusted messengers to deliver that information to people who have been lied to and misled by others they trust. And so it's a large, long process, and it involves increasing our transparency as well. On the election side, you've seen great clerks in West Michigan, like Justin Roebuck and Lisa Lyons, do even more than they've done ever before, along with the township and city clerks, to invite people in to the process. Because truly, the more well-placed and well-intentioned scrutiny we endure, the more people will simply see the process is secure, and there are many layers in place to assure that it is.
And speaking of those two, they both, of course, run tests on the equipment, and they invite people to them, and they're posted on their websites, and you can see that. I don't know if anybody could have predicted that 2020 was going to create the kind of atmosphere around elections than it did. But I want to ask you this candid question. Because of COVID, you sent out absentee ballot applications, not the ballots, the ballot applications to everybody in the state, everybody on the voter list, for which Republicans criticized you pretty heavily, even saw some court activity. The courts ruled that that was okay. But in looking back, again, not knowing that 2020 was going to be the firestorm that it was, or I don't think we could have known that, was that a good idea?
Yes, it was a data-driven decision with an eye towards what is best for every voter. I mean, my job as the state's chief election officer is to set politics and partisan rancor aside and just say, what does the data say is the best way to make sure every citizen has the rightly placed faith in the process and has what they need to participate in our elections. And you have to remember, 2020 was the first major election cycle where we had this expanded right for every citizen to vote absentee. So it was incumbent on me as the Secretary of State to make sure, no matter where anyone lived or whether they lived in a northern part of the state or southern part of the state, that they had equal access to information about their right to vote absentee in that election. The fact that we were in the midst of a pandemic made it all the more important to do that, because so many people, and indeed 3.3 million citizens did, wanted the option that they had the right to access to vote from home in that election.
So this is the next big election cycle. Since then, you're not going to send out the absentees again, because we're not in the
and a lot of local clerks are doing it this time.
Right, that's right. I did see that there are a number of clerks that are doing it. But there is no pandemic. Still, people are voting, even as you and I sit here and talk, because, and it's not early voting. It's no reason absentee voting, and it started late last week. How has that changed the face of elections, and has it changed the face of the electorate?
It has expanded the electorate. Certainly, we see a lot more young people participating, but it's also expanded the ways in which people can get their ballots and return them, which is really how we look at it, making sure everyone knows the different ways they can get their ballot, either on Election Day or before, and then that they know how to return it so that we can count it efficiently and securely. So it has expanded election season. You're seeing political ads or other things happening much earlier this time than in years past, and already 1.5 million citizens have requested to vote absentee in these midterms. In 2018, 1.1 million voted absentee total. So we're already seeing this, baked-in increase in absentee voting, even absent the height of the pandemic. That also indicates that we're on our way to having one of the highest turnout midterm elections in our state's history.
One of the things that local clerks have been asking for, and you've been talking about, is being able to deal with those absentee votes earlier, prep them and get them ready to go. There's a little wiggle room this year, but still not what clerks have asked for. And as a voter, that doesn't necessarily concern me if it takes a little longer. As a political reporter that stands over at that wall on election night, not seeing returns come in because there's so many absentees to be dealt with, it's a little bit harrowing trying to figure out how some of these races are going to go. What, from your perspective, needs to happen to get those ballots counted sooner? Well,
I think a couple of things. Certainly we need more time allowed for pre-processing those ballots as they come in, but we also need resources and funding to actually do the pre-processing. I think it was perhaps lost on lawmakers that you can't just snap your fingers and have staff in place and security in place to ensure that pre-processing happens. It takes time to develop all that, and with the late passage of this legislation and the minimal time given, we don't have much of that. So that said, I think citizens need to be patient. After the polls close, it will take time, perhaps even 24 hours after the polls close, and maybe into Wednesday, maybe even Thursday, before we know the full results of the election. And I think everyone would agree we want accurate results and an efficient, secure counting process above, speeding through the process. And so that's what we prioritize.
We have reached out to the campaign of Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Christina Caramo, and hope to have a similar interview with her in the near future.